welcome to the second video in a new series on the Confucian Analects, and I'm conveniently wearing my Confucianism tie today, though I'm not sure if the camera will, and your screen will make that particularly clear. So, in this video, I want to just introduce a few basic points, a few basic terms and concepts about classical Confucianism. We are looking here at the Hong Kong airport. This is a photo taken from Sunset Peak one beautiful morning on Lantau Island. And that's what I've selected for the lower right corner of the screen. Let's now go to some simple points on the analects. First, a super simple point. We'll start with the very, very basics. Someone out there doesn't know this or needs to have this point in mind first, so you can organize all the other information. Confucius is a Chinese philosopher, roughly 500 BC, or a little bit before Socrates. He's famous for his ethics, which is taught in the Analects, which is not a book by Confucius. It's a book by his followers, and it's about Confucius and contains the words of Confucius. And even that's a little oversimplified. There's other people in the book. Not every passage is directly quoting from or giving an anecdote about Confucius, but plenty of them are. It is the #1 book on Confucius. He lived in the declining years of the Zhou dynasty. Now I have to begin to clarify some things for those who don't know. There are different systems for transliterating Chinese into Roman lettering, for transliterating Chinese into English-style letters. One venerable system is the Wade-Giles transliteration system. The classic public domain translation by James Legge used the Wade-Giles system. Although I think I've seen some updated versions that have converted names from the Wade-Giles to the Pinyin system using James Legge's translation. Right? That's totally fine. So the name of the dynasty we're talking about is Chau in the Wade-Giles transliteration system, but in the newer Pinyin transliteration system, it's Zhou, Z-H-O-U. Now, the Pinyin system is, I understand, the officially recommended one. It's the official policy of the government of China. And I'm not an expert here, but as far as I know, there's nothing particularly wrong with either system, but the Pinyin system is probably a little better. At any rate, I'm not qualified to say anything further. I can say something about pronunciation. J-O-E, like Joe Biden, is an acceptable pronunciation of this until you learn better. I've not learned better myself, so I will leave you with that. I just say Zhou. Confucius revered the early Zhou rulers, but he's in the declining era. He reviewed the Duke of Zhou. He revered the Duke of Zhou, the rules of propriety they had set up. We'll get back to rules of propriety. There's a technical term there, a special term. Maybe technical is not the right word. There's a special term for rules of propriety. He revered the customs, the traditions, the rules of propriety set up by the early Zhou rulers. Now, in Confucius' day, politics was a mess, governance was a mess. Different rulers are squabbling and vying for power. The Zhou emperor's power is waning. Basically, society is going through a bit of a decline in this time, and Confucius thought the decline of Chinese society was rooted in a decline of virtue. Political decline, social decline, economic decline, pretty much any decline you can think of is all going to be rooted in a moral decline. Morality is the root. Confucius wanted peace and order to be restored. Now, this involves wanting people of all positions in life to live properly according to their stations. Know your role in society, know your duties, and do them. Now, this includes submission to higher authority. Now, one oversimplification of Confucianism is that it's all about submission to higher authority. It's all about preserving the old social hierarchies and making sure people obey their authorities. Well, I won't say it's not about that, but it's not all about that. There's a very strong emphasis in the Analects on exercising your own authority properly, or we could phrase it this way, on not abusing your authority. From time to time illustrated this while talking to students by pulling up some edition of the Analects and putting it in Microsoft Word. Normally the James Legge public domain edition, easy to find, easy to Control-C, Control-V into Microsoft Word, and then scrolling through the text for a few minutes. And every time I find a passage about submitting to higher authority, highlighting it in a particular color, let's say purple, purple and maybe making it bold or something. And then when I find a passage about not abusing your authority, putting it in a different color, let's say green, and also making it italics. So bold, purple, for passages that say something about obeying higher authorities, obey your parents, or obey the ruler, or something like that. And instructions to people in authority to exercise their authority properly, to not abuse their authority, green italics. Now, I use totally different color combinations when I'm doing this in class. This is an example. And if I do this, I'll find actually quite a few passages on both. And I've never systematically gone through the whole text and done this, but I always tell my students, you could do it and you'd find plenty of both. And my suspicion is you'll find more green italics than bold purple. There's a very strong emphasis, and my impression is it's a stronger emphasis on not abusing your authority than on obeying higher authority. So that doesn't mean that there's no emphasis on authority. If what you want is some sort of radical egalitarianism and no submission to authority at all matters, except maybe children until they're old enough to take care of themselves or something like that. Well, Confucianism is not the philosophy for you. But at any rate, don't oversimplify it. There's a very strong emphasis, I think a stronger emphasis on not abusing your authority, on being kind, being moral, being honest, having integrity, not using your power for selfish advantage if you are in authority. Now, peace and order would only be restored by virtue, which requires a return to the old Zhou way of life. Now, before we get to some of those key terms, let's make this quick observation. This is a Confucian way of thinking. It may be grounded in the Mencius. Well, Mencius. Mencius is another philosopher. Confucius is the contemporary English version, a better, well, still not quite correct. I can't even do these pronunciations quite right, but a closer statement of the original name would be Kongzi, which is Master Kong. And Mengzi, Master Meng, is a better pronunciation of a person also known as Mencius. So Mencius is a Confucian philosopher. Confucius is a Confucian philosopher. Kongzi, Confucius, and then a little bit later, Mengzi, Mencius. Mencius might be the origin of this, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to check. I think this description of the relationships of which society is composed is well grounded in the ancient texts. It is totally consistent with the Analects. It's very Analecty, but I don't think it's stated in the Analects. This is just a Confucian way of thinking. So your position in life, your role in society, your obligations, also your path to happiness, and what is morally right for you. All of these things converge. They all come together. At the risk of oversimplifying, you might even say they're all the same thing. There are 5 main relationships of which society is composed. There's ruler, subject, parent, child, husband, wife, elder brother, younger brother, friend, friend. And I think the friend thing has is understood in terms of teacher, student, or older friend, younger friend, or at least mentor, mentee, or at least it corresponds nicely to those concepts. So all of these are non-egalitarian relationships. There's a higher figure and a lower figure. There's a person in authority, there's a person under authority, or there's a leader and there is a follower in all of these relationships. That's the Confucian way of thinking. So instructions to people to properly follow the leader, properly be under the authority of the other, will be found in these texts. But so will many instructions, and I tend to think more instructions to the people in authority, to the leaders in the relationships, to lead properly, to be kind, to be virtuous, to work with and act with integrity, to not abuse their power. All right, so this is just some of the basic concepts to keep in mind when you're studying the Analects. Things will probably not get really fun until we actually look at the text and start looking at golden rule passages and things like that. Now, here is an old list. Again, this is not necessarily something you'll read in the Analects, this particular statement of what are the 5 Confucian virtues, though I think it is grounded very well in an old text, though I couldn't tell you for sure which text. It's a very analecty list of virtues. Here are 5 virtues. Now here's where I got to pause and clarify something else about the language. And let me skim over this and make sure it looks okay. I'm not noticing any mistakes or any issues, except some of the fonts might not correspond to each other, but that's fine. All right, there are different Chinese languages. Let me draw a comparison / contrast. In the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Urdu and Hindi are almost the same spoken language, but they're totally different written languages. Urdu is based off of a Persian alphabet. Hindi is based off of a Sanskrit alphabet. But they're almost the same language spoken. They're just totally different languages written. Chinese is kind of the opposite. It's one written language, but multiple spoken languages. Now, I'm simplifying things a bit. And one simplification to keep in mind, one complication to keep in mind is that written Chinese does have at least this one major difference, or there's at least this one major difference between different versions of written Chinese. There are traditional characters and there's simplified characters. So that's what we have here. The traditional characters will have more pen strokes. The simplified characters have fewer. So there's that distinction between different kinds of written Chinese. So things are complicated. I'm maybe oversimplifying a bit, but spoken Chinese is much more different. You could read the simplified characters or the traditional characters and speak more than one version of spoken Chinese while reading the same characters. And the 2 major ones, well, if you just go with one, you would say Mandarin or Putonghua, and that's spoken by, check the internet to be sure, but I think something like 1 billion people or almost 1 billion people. But some of the other ones are pretty significant. Cantonese or Guangdonghua is the runner-up to Mandarin Putonghua, and Cantonese Guangdonghua is spoken by, again, check the internet, but I think maybe a couple 100 million people. It's a pretty big language. You'll find it spoken in Hong Kong and a good chunk of southern China, outside of Hong Kong. Lots of people speak Guangdonghua, but Putonghua is the big one. Now, there's lots of others. I once met a guy at McDonald's who said he was from a village somewhere in mainland China where I think he said there were 13 tones in the language. So Chinese is a tonal language. There's a difference between saying, hang on, let me see if I can get my brain, my memories, and my tongue into gear here. Maybe I'll just get my notes together. In Cantonese, Guangdonghua, there's a difference between saying ma, ma, and ma. I'm not sure I got it right myself. Ma, 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 a high tone, ma, a low tone, and ma, a low tone that's rising as you say it, and they mean totally different words. So Chinese is a tonal language. Cantonese, well, with a simplified Cantonese system, you only have 6 tones to keep track of. Mandarin has fewer. A proper Cantonese system would have a few extra tones. Let's see, I met a guy at McDonald's, I was saying, who told me he was from a village in mainland where they spoke a version of Chinese that had, I think, 13 tones. I'm not sure what is the maximum number. Different versions of Chinese vary in these different ways. And after Cantonese, I don't know. Ask the internet. What's the 3rd most spoken kind of Chinese? I think Shanghai speaks a different version. And Taiwan has a lot of people who speak a different version that might be a 4th one. I don't think it's the same as Shanghai. Check the internet for that. So that's one distinction to keep in mind here. Another is traditional versus simplified characters. And then another one is different romanization systems. So I mentioned Pinyin and Wade-Giles. Now I'm setting Wade-Giles aside. If you read this stuff, actually, if you read, for example, here's where this totally comes into books read by Pakistanis and Kenyans and Americans and Brazilians. If you're going to read The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis in English, you will see the word Tao, T-A-O. That's Wade-Giles. The newer way of spelling Tao is D-A-O, and that's Pinyin. So if I was going to be thorough here, I have a Wade-Giles for all of these, but I'm setting aside Wade-Giles. Here we have the Mandarin or Putonghua romanization for these terms. And I guess I'm not thorough. Sorry, I think I only have it I think I only have that for this last term here. The Mandarin or Putonghua romanization or English style lettering for using pinyin for these terms. We're looking at key vocabulary words here, and I've got the pinyin transliteration system for the Mandarin version of Chinese. But right before that, I also have the Cantonese or Guangdonghua version of Chinese pronunciation for these terms. And I'm giving it in a different romanization system that's big in Hong Kong. It's the Yutping. I think that's spelled Jyutping, Yutping the Yutping romanization system, the Yutping system for converting Cantonese Guangdonghua sounds into English style lettering. The Yutping romanization system for Cantonese is what we have here, and it uses numbers to indicate tones. So, for example, yi is a simple low tone. Yan is a medium falling tone. Yan, you lower your tone a bit as you talk, but you start off in the middle. You don't start high, low. You start medium. Lai is medium. You don't go high or low, and it stays even. Yan, you start medium and go low. I'm sure I'm botching the pronunciations myself, but I'm better than I used to be. All right, so what we have here is 1, Cantonese Yutping romanization system, 2, pinyin romanization of the Mandarin term, and then the Chinese term, and where there's a distinction, simplified and traditional characters. And then we have some of the available English translations, and scholars I've consulted on how to translate include Dawson, Legge, and Gardner. So Legge's the classic public domain translation into English. Gardner's the author of that Oxford book I mentioned in the last video, a very short introduction to Confucianism. Dawson, that's probably the translator of the Oxford World Classics edition I have over there on the shelf. Okay, so those are some of the translation sources I've consulted. And here are the terms, and now I'll just go through it and shut up. I'll mostly go through it and shut up. 5 classical Confucian virtues, Yan or Ren. This key term, the single most important term in all Confucianism probably, which can be translated or has been translated as benevolence, humanity, kindness, perfect virtue. But now that I think of it, let's Alt-tab over to a web browser. And let's go to the Muller, not public domain, but conveniently online. Thank you, Charles. Muller translation of the Analects. And remind ourselves that this word, Yan, Ren, this word for benevolence, kindness, humanity, appears a whole lot in the Analects. And then let's go down to this passage where our translator gives a useful commentary on this term, observing benevolence, altruism, goodness, humaneness, not all of which I've included here. You know, I haven't integrated my notes with what we can observe here with Muller. I can't keep everything in my head. I can't keep everything typed either. I don't have mental capacity or time. It's a difficult concept to translate. It refers to an innate capacity possessed by all human beings to do good, as human beings should. It's the quality that makes us human and not just animals. Not that easy to translate. In the earlier iterations of Muller's translation, he tried to use the same word, and he eventually just left it untranslated as Ren, which is fine with me, perfectly respectable strategy. All right, so if you want to just keep in mind a short list of terms that can be used to translate Yan, while keeping in mind that none of them captures the whole thing properly, you're doing pretty well. Actually, let me make an observation on this term before I go any further. So what we're looking at here is Ren, Yan, and this is a word for person or human being. And then this is the word for two. The term ren or yan has a word for human and then a word for two. And you put those two together to make the combined word yan. That's how Chinese works. You put characters, you put more complicated characters together by combining more simple characters. So we have here the simple character for human, or one of the simple characters for human, and then a simple character for two, and you put it together and you get yan, ren. So the structure of the term indicates that it's a term to describe humanity together. Human beings in relationship, human beings and more than one of them. Ren is a term for Ren or yan is a term for humanity and community. Now, next term, yi. Yi, righteousness, justice, rightness. Lai or li can be translated ritual or right or rules of propriety. Now, actually, I'm guessing I was going to guess that Muller gave us a super convenient, he does not use these simplified characters, that he gave us a super convenient paragraph introducing Lai. I'm going to say maybe check for another video on this channel, or just skip past me and read Herbert Fingeret's Confucius, the Secular is Sacred, if you want a good introduction to this. Ritual or right or rules of propriety, this refers to well, something that's, again, not that easy to translate in a single term or phrase, but it refers to the way the customs by which we live a moral life. That's what it refers to. It refers to all the rituals that make us human beings and that make us civilized and that make us good. Things like training children to say please and thank you. That's lahi. It's an important part of a good life. There's room to discuss. Were there time to discuss, which there's not, there is at least room to discuss questions like what exactly are the right rituals. And actually, that's an important Confucian topic. Perhaps more on that later. If not, ask in a comment and see if I say anything. Okay, so ji, knowledge or wisdom is another term. Shun, xin, integrity, good faith, sincerity is another key term. And here are some more key terms. Xiu, shu, reciprocity or empathy or altruism. Now this one is definitely worth a quick look over at our interlinear Muller translation here. Watch what happens when we search for this term. It appears once here in book 15 of Analects. It appears once here in book 4, and then our third use, because it's only 3 times on this URL, is here where, oh, silly me, is here where Muller actually does give us our useful commentary on Li. So I'm going to say, you want a better commentary on Li? Here's another option, besides seeing if I have it in a short video, or reading the secular Confucius, the Secular is Sacred, the Secular as Sacred by Fingeret, Herbert Fingeret. Go to the Muller translation and read these paragraphs. Anyway, the third use on this URL of this term is where Muller describes ritual, li, lai, and happens to mention reciprocity. And here we're told the book 4 use, the way of Confucius is to be loyal and have a sense of reciprocity. That's actually a pretty good and important use of it. Let's see here, Zigong. Zigong asks Confucius, is there a single concept we can take as a guide for the actions of our whole life? And Confucius says, try this word. What you don't like done to yourself, don't do to others. Now, there may be issues with translation here. If you run this word through Google Translate, it might tell you it means forgiveness or something like that. The translators will normally say something like reciprocity or altruism or empathy. Those certainly seem good translations of it in this context, at least, because Confucius elaborates by giving the negative golden rule, which you don't like done to yourself, don't do to others. So reciprocity, or how else should we try to pronounce it? Shu. This term, pardon my bad pronunciation if you know better, this term appears only twice in the Analects, and its use here is so important that it is not only one of the fine statements of the negative golden rule, don't do to others what you want them not to do to you, but it's also a single concept you can spend your whole life working on. So that's a really important term, if it's one word that describes your entire life's obligations. So that's important. But then why doesn't it appear as often as Ren, Yan, which appears over 100 times in the Analects? Well, it might be a simple case of when Zigong asks for one word, this is a good word that works. But if you're going to describe in any kind of detail, you've got to talk about a lot of stuff. You got to talk about justice. You got to talk about knowledge and integrity, and you got to talk about benevolence, humaneness, kindness, Ren. You got to talk, Yan. You got to talk about ritual and rite. And sometimes, if you need a short statement, the negative golden rule will cover all this ground. All these concepts are interconnected is the point I'm currently trying to make. Now back to our vocabulary terms. Zong, zhong, loyalty or conscientiousness or doing your best for. Hao, xiao, filial piety. And dou, dao, way, or road. And then junzi, let's see, chunze, junze, junze, is a word for a virtuous person. Now, do I need to give any further commentary on this before I wrap up this video? Probably not much, but maybe I'll do a quick control F in Muller here to point out that this is a key term, appears a little over 100 times in the Analects, and also to point out that it's a term that also requires some good commentary. Off the top of my head, I would say the Oxford Very Short Introduction to Confucianism would be a fine way of getting at a proper understanding of this term. But also, be cheap, save money if you wish, and just read this on the Muller translation, and you'll be doing pretty well. All right. That's it. I'm going to shut up now. In the next video, I hope to actually open the Analects and start looking at cool passages. See you then. Thanks for watching.